G'day team, thanks for checking into the Breathless Blog once again. Appreciate your company, even though I can't see you, but hopefully you can definitely hear and see me. It's been a hectic week. I've got through my half marathon. Thanks for all your well wishes to date. Touch wood, I've managed to dodge the plague that had ridden our house, burn it to the ground last week. The D6, what a champion of a camera. I introduced it to you last week. I can say that it was worth all of the extra pennies that I have spent. Autofocus in particular and how fast it was just phenomenal on Saturday at rugby. So I can report back and say that was amazing. Look, this week in itself's been just busy and hectic. I've caught up with a former AFL player. I've caught up with a surgeon. I think he's a proctologist or a colonoscopist or something like that. Basically, he's at the arse end of surgery, as Dad joked it in my head. The other day I caught up with a lady who was responsible for supporting and nurturing boys and families who come from, I'm going to call it a marginalised background to Nudgee, about 15 to 20 years ago. So to sit and have a chat with her about her shared experience in that space, tremendous, really, really privileged. And again, I've got these emotions creeping into my life at the moment because the Reflections project is coming towards the back end of its completion as well. A hell of a lot of work to be done before now and then. A lot of writing. I've still got plenty of shoots to do. I'm juggling the idea of border closures and trying to get around, and I've still got a bit of Queensland travel to do. I've got to hop over the border, hopefully, maybe to Melbourne in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So, look, who knows? I've given up trying to predict what's going to happen, but that's what's happening. Look, I want to have a little chat about something that pops into my mind quite often, and it just keeps coming back and it keeps finding me. In that, there are times and situations over the past decade where I've been standing and observing something or observing someone. I've got a camera in my hand and I don't know whether it's morally or ethically right to lift the camera and pull the trigger. I had one of these moments on Saturday at rugby, which is what's jogged this train of thought and sort of why I want to share and open up a bit of dialogue and discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this. So Saturday afternoon, I turn up. It's before the first 15 kickoff. I'm watching the back end of the seconds play. And as I get closer to the sideline, I notice there's a young fella. He's a year 12 boy. And he's with the first aiders. He's on the green whistle. He's got a couple of brilliant staff around him and a couple of close friends or family members with him. He's clearly in a state of distress. Ice pack on the knee, on the outside of the knee. And I'm no doctor, but to me, that tells me suspected ACL, anterior cruciate ligament damage. And yes, it's the first game of the season, but GPS sport goes for 9 weeks. That probably means that there's a fair chance that if he has done that injury, his season, his time playing for Nudgee is over. He's quite distressed, he's upset. Obviously, he's dealing with the pain of the injury, but probably also the shock and the emotions that have overcome him and realising that, his time playing with his schoolmates is probably done. And, the rehabilitation that lies ahead of him and all of those things. So I'm looking at this poor fella and he's distraught, and I'm thinking, I know because it's so emotional, there is opportunity to take a photograph that could be quite powerful. I've said it before, but often my favourite photographs, weddings, sport, travel, whatever it is, are ones that are emotional, ones that make you stop and think and feel or question. And I'm thinking I can probably get all of those if I lift the camera. But is it fair on him, and why am I taking the photo? Is it for me and my own pride or ego in my work, or am I better off respecting the dignity of him? Will he ever want to look at this footage again in years to come? Probably not. So in this particular instance, I've put the camera down and I just let him have some space, and I haven't taken the photo, and for him and those around him, that, as far as I'm concerned, that recollection will just be a memory without any photographic reference. And I'm comfortable with that. It's not like I've got any regrets for not taking the photograph, because ultimately in that moment, I had a think tank, thought it through, and tried to put him first and And I'm sure that's probably the result he wants as well, rather than having such a moment played out in a public forum and documented forever. But there's certainly been other times where, either in travel or different situations, where something like that has happened in front of me, and in a split second of all of those thoughts crammed into questioning what am I going to do, I've taken the photo. One of those moments that springs to mind, and I'll share the photo, is that about 6 years ago I was in Istanbul. My wife, we were doing some travel in the Northern Hemisphere. We're at the Blue Mosque, and for those who've travelled, you know that as a tourist, one of the hot spots for anyone to go to are generally places of worship significance, religious and spiritual significance, because the architecture and the significance of those places lend itself to being discovered or explored. So turn up to the Blue Mosque, and of course there's people everywhere. This is pre-COVID well and truly, but it's the world's open. There's people from all over the world going through this mosque, and I felt uncomfortable. I felt a bit intrusive, and I sort of looked around, and my wife and I didn't really, we sort of walked through, but it was kind of like the first time you walk into someone's house. You don't just walk in and plonk yourself down and throw your feet on the coffee table, which clearly other people were kind of doing in a metaphoric sense at this mosque. So I'm looking around thinking, geez, this is pretty intense. It's such a beautiful architectural building, but what sort of photos do I want to get out of this? But I was standing in the corner, and I could see this lady. She was just sitting on the floor, a local lady. So she was basically just waiting for a chime to go off for all the tourists to get kicked out, so she could get on with her daily ritual of prayer. And just the look on her face as she's standing next to this other lady who's taking a photo, right inside a bubble, just inside her personal space, said it all. And I thought, right, I'm actually going to take the photo here, realising that I am also part of the problem, and it is a contradiction and a bit of a juxtaposition around me actually taking the photo, but for that reason I'm still going to take it. So it's still today one of the more favourite photographs that I have, that I've probably taken, probably because even at that stage in my journey as a photographer, I'm probably just proud now that I was actually still conscious enough and alert enough to connect with what was happening around me, and that in turn has probably helped me take a stronger photograph. And there's another one that I will share that just comes to mind now of that day, probably testament to the headspace I was in, that I love the photograph. A second thing that I'll share is that there's an event that happens at Nudgee every year, and it challenges me every time to photograph it. And that's the Old Boys Memorial Mass, and it happens in the first weekend of November. And it's where old boys and their families are invited back to the college to attend Mass and remember, or attend a liturgy and remember, it is a Mass. Remember those loved ones as part of that Nudgee community that have passed away. And the attendance to that Mass is always really special, and it varies from people who are in their 80s and 90s, who have lived a whole life outside of that school community, but still come back. But it's also, amongst that congregation, are people that are still very much coming to grips and coming to terms with the loss of someone they love in the last few weeks, months, year. And it's a really emotional time for them. Now, the school's asked me to come in and photograph this event. Now, I wouldn't say that it's got easier. Probably, if anything, it's probably become a little bit harder because I know what's coming. But in saying that, I have developed technically, and my approach is probably has shifted along a little bit more, where I still feel I can get some strong images from that day that tell the story of the day, but don't necessarily get in the faces of people while they're grieving. Like a lot of those people I know, and they know me and they know my role at the school, but at the same time, there's a line where if someone's, got tears rolling in their face, again, I know that that's a strong opportunity for a photo, but for what reason? Why am I there doing it? For what purpose? For that particular person? am I actually going to take a photograph? In that instance, where I think I can maintain the dignity and respect for people, I'll take the photo. You know, sometimes where I can't, then I just let things be and let things slide. You know, probably the third thing that I'll mention is, you know, through the life of travel and even sometimes walking through our very own city here in Brisbane, you see people who are living rough. Actually, that even reminds me, geez, the last couple of weeks, so this week, again, like I forgot before, so I've photographed a social justice initiative from Nudgee College, and they do what's called a big brekkie and big barbecue. Now that's where boys volunteer with some staff. They head into the valley, they head into Aspley, so a suburb out of Brisbane, and in the city, and they cook a barbecue breakfast or dinner for people living rough, people who are disadvantaged, you know, really, you know, struggling with life at the moment. Sometimes they're homeless, sometimes they're not, but they go and do that. And while it's such a great initiative, and it's been going for over 10 years, it's been going for over 20 years, I think. Such a great initiative. There's never, ever much documenting of that. So I've gone along to photograph something like that, and like I'm, again, trying to be super careful and mindful that I respect people's dignity and what's happening around me. So I'll put a couple of those photos up as well. But look, I've still, as you can tell, like it's still something that reaches out and touches me and challenges me all the time. There's a couple of documentaries that I want to share with you as well, that if you want to have some thought-provoking aspects as a human, and as a human who loves to take photos, then I would suggest to you get The Picture. So that is a memoir and documentary on the life of a gentleman called John G. Morris, who was an editor and photojournalist with Time magazine, Life magazine, one of the two. The second one would be McCullen. Again, a memoir-style documentary on a gentleman called Don McCullen, who was a war and conflict photographer between, I think, 1959 and I think even into the Gulf War, like even into the 90s. I think he covered conflicts there. So, look, these two gents share their lived experience about living and working in a space where, you know, not only are you photographing really confronting, powerful messaging, but now quite often they're dealing and themselves in situations where it's life or death. You know, if you've got a camera and you're trying to document something, but you're getting shot at, and in fact, I think Don himself was shot, and Robert Capa, one of the most famous war photographers of the past century, if you like, died in action. Like, he literally died photographing conflict. You know, when you consider that, and when I consider that, man, you know, like my situations where I'm struggling to pick up a camera or not are certainly not that in your face and intense, but I love to sit down and watch those documentaries because I sit and I marvel and I'm in awe of those particular people who can go and do that and still remain connected to the storytelling element and the purpose behind why they're trying to take those photographs. It just amazes me probably because I know within myself that's just not me. You know, I'd love to think that I could do that, but it's just not. Like, I'm just probably not cut that way to be able to do that. Hence a lot of discussion of this blog today. So look, there's a couple of things just to, I guess, provoke and share some thought, but also to give a couple of documentaries for you to have a watch at, especially if you're in this wonderful thing we call lockdown at the moment, wherever you are. Check it out. You know, I guarantee it'll certainly stir a few things within you as well. So that's been the Breathless Blog. I know you're probably sick of that bloody crow or raven singing out, and probably sick of me singing out as well. So till next time, thanks again. That's been the Breathless Blog. Hey, drop a comment in. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've had a chat about today. But yeah, next week, catch you then. See ya.